At any rate, let's get on to tonight's program. So we've talked a lot, we always talk a lot about ISO ratings. ISO ratings are key measures of the effectiveness of fire departments. ESD commissioners often need to make strategic decisions to improve those ratings so they can help reduce homeowners' insurance premiums for the people that they serve. Our guest tonight is Phillip Bradley from ISO. We're going to be talking tonight about, and Phillip, make sure I say this wrong or say it right, because I often don't think about what it stands for. The Public Protection Classification. That's what PPC stands for, right?
That is correct.
That is technically what we're talking about when we talk about ISO rating. It's your Public Protection Classification rating, or your Public Protection Classification. No, the PPC is a countrywide classification system used by ISO to grade a community's fire protection. That grade is then used by insurance carriers to set the property insurance rates. Now, Phillip Bradley is the manager at ISO, the Insurance Services Office. He's a professional engineer and a certified fire protection specialist. And Phillip's going to come here tonight to tell us what ESD commissioners need to understand about ISO. And I know there's been some updates to the classification system, some interesting stuff that you're here to fill us in on. So take it away.
Sounds super. Thank you for letting me be here.
Of course.
I always enjoy talking to people about ISO, and more particularly our PPC program. And the invitation that you extended. One of the things that I found real interesting, there was a statement there that said, we want the ESD commissioners to be able to use this information to develop strategies to improve their ratings. This is something we wholeheartedly support. We want people to do as well as possible.
I think that's something that I want to reiterate. You guys are not here you want people to get ones, basically. That's something you want to see them improve their fire protection and get the best classification they can, right? You're not here to penalize or degrade anybody. You're here to help them make the grade, is what you strive for.
As I do my travels, I talk a lot about the correlation between better fire protection and lower commercial and residential homeowners, or excuse me, commercial and residential losses. That correlates also into most of the insurance companies will offer lower insurance premiums based on the fire protection the community provides, and then that correlates into the incentive for communities to provide better fire protection. So this really is a win-win for everybody involved.
Absolutely.
So, now the exception that I took to the invitation is we're talking about new concepts, new transitions to ISO. And I found it real interesting. We actually started this process to update our fire suppression rating schedule. We initially called it the 2009 updates to the fire suppression rating schedule. That being said, we started working on this in 2006 and 2007. We started soliciting input from the fire service. What is it that you think that we're doing well? What is it that we're not doing well? What should we be doing differently? And we studied it, and we got a lot of feedback.
I'm sure.
We got into the point where it took us we missed our 2009 deadline to get to the updates to the schedule. We didn't actually file them until 2012. Mm-hmm. But they were filed countrywide, and they were adopted basically countrywide with the exception of here in Texas. There was a few things that were some holdouts to the grading schedule that people wanted credit for this, and people just some little things, and we finally got it adopted in 2015. But even then, 2015, now we're in 2018, we're talking about this is a grading schedule we've been using for 3 years. So I kind of challenged the notion that this is new concepts, that this has been around for a while. People have seen this, they're working on it. It is new for some people, and so we've been doing our best to get the word out. Mm-hmm. We want everybody to do as well as they can, so thank you for the invitation to be here.
And I should say that Phillip is a veteran presenter at our safety conferences, and we've been thrilled to have him come share his knowledge with our safety conference attendees. And I may mention the conference later on once or twice before this night is over. But Phillip, take it away and tell us about the classification system.
Well, very good. I also like to hear about the conferences. That means I might get an invitation again to go to the conference this year.
Awesome.
All right, we're talking about our fire suppression rating schedule. This document probably looks and feels very familiar to people. Before I get deep into what's changed on it, I kind of like to clear the table a little bit about what is it. This is primarily, it's an insurance rating tool. This is what insurance companies use to set and establish their commercial and homeowners premiums. It's built into their rate setting process. Now, that being said, we've already kind of talked about it is an incentive program. At least some people will say that there's an incentive for communities to provide better fire protection. Also, recently this has been referred to as third-party validation. And third-party validation is very important to the communities because we can get up there and say we're the best community there is. But it always seems to come off better when somebody else from the outside looking in comes in and says, you know what, this is a community that really provides good fire protection. So that's an important key to this. This is not intended to be your master plan. You know, says so right in the grading schedule, you know, right from the start. There are other things to take into consideration. I like to talk a little bit about some of my favorite statements. I got into a meeting with one community and he said, let me see if I understand this correctly. Fire chief, he said, you tell me I need two engine companies, right? Well, the average age in my community is 65 years old. I don't need engine companies, I need ambulances. And I have a hard time disagreeing with that. You know, this is just what it is. You know, this is built for determining what level of fire protection you're providing to do structural fire protection in homes and businesses. So it's a good program for what it is, but you know, it's not going to address everything that you need to address in your master plan. That being said, we are not a state agency. We're not a regulatory authority. There is no compliance requirement to follow our grading criteria. Those that do, we want to see that they do the best that they possibly can. So now, I think what you really were wanting me to talk about is between the old grading schedule and the new grading schedule, what has changed. So I'd like to jump into that a little bit.
Take it away.
All right. We used to call it receiving and handling alarms. Now we refer to it as emergency communications. The changes here, primarily modernization. I used to ask, as part of my presentation, you know, can anybody think of anything that's changed since 1980 in communications? Or excuse me, in the fire service. And one of my favorite comments is there was a crusty old fire chief in the back. He said, yeah, none of these kids in this whole room, none of them were even born in 1980. So there have been a lot of changes to the grading schedule. The old grading schedule served us very well. It was last written in 1980. It had been updated a little bit along the way, but it really was in need of modernization. So we've modernized it. We've included things like cell phone calls, voice over internet protocol, CAD dispatch. There's a number of changes. Now the one I really like to drive home when I do one of these presentations is a need for call detailed records. Because without call detailed records, there's a lot of points that you're just not eligible for because you don't have the documentation necessary to support us giving you credit for the number of dispatchers that you have. For the most part, that's the big items in the communications section that have changed. In the fire department section, we've made a number of changes there. One of the big changes is automatic aid. We've certainly increased the amount of automatic aid credit that we're allowed to give to communities. The personally owned vehicles. We used to have some rules against the use of personally owned vehicles in responding to fires, and we've somewhat reduced those areas where we wouldn't give credit. Deployment analysis is probably one of the bigger changes in our grading schedule. This is something I'd like everybody to be aware of because it used to be called distribution of companies. In that genre, it was a 4-point item. Now it's a 10-point item. And so it's ever more critical to where your apparatus is placed in a community than it is maybe how well equipped it is. So this is certainly a big item that we would want to talk about with communities and make sure they're addressing it appropriately. One of my favorite comments from a fire chief was, we really need you to go ahead and make sure that you are notify our community that they're out of compliance with deployment analysis. We had areas that were beyond 5 road miles of a fire station. And his logic on that statement was, if you don't tell them, somebody from the outside tell them that I need another fire station, I'll never get the fire station that I actually need. And so I really liked hearing that comment because a lot of times we get a lot of critical statements, but not a lot of positive support statements. So that's one I've latched onto and kept in my pocket for a number of years. We used to give credit for on drill field activity. We give credit for the use of streets and open areas. Now we have shifted that credit to company training, where it probably really belonged all along, because there's a distinction between doing training at the drill field and then using that. There's just a difference there. For the most part, in the training section, we've just modernized it. We've relied heavily on certified training and certification, and so that's an area that we've made some changes in as well. Another area, the final area in the fire department standpoint, is the operational consideration. Now, for the most part, what I'm seeing is most departments already are doing the operational consideration. What we're looking for are standard operating procedures, and then also the NIMS training that the departments would have or should be getting. On those items, for the most part, people are doing what we're requiring even before we get there. But for those departments that are not, we want to provide an incentive for them to do just that. Then we'll see a new area in the fire suppression rating schedule. This is community risk reduction. On community risk reduction, this is a pretty big transition from the old fire suppression rating schedule. This is where we give credit for your fire prevention activities. We give credit for fire prevention code enforcement, for fire investigation, for public fire safety, public education programs. Now those probably sound pretty familiar for most of the people involved in the fire service here in Texas, because we had the Texas exceptions to the fire suppression rating schedule prior to the adoption of this new schedule. And part of the reason that this was held back is we're missing a few items of where we gave credit before. For example, we used to give credit for the construction code enforcement in Texas. Now, in ISO's realm, we give credit for the building code effectiveness grading schedule. And that being said, we already have another program that goes into a whole lot more detail, more depth and detail on building codes, and we really wanted people to use that instead of having something in the fire suppression rating schedule that somewhat competes with that. And so the argument was that we'll put more points under the other 3 items and take away those points for construction code enforcement and just reallocate them through the schedule. Now there were 2 other items: compressed air foam systems or CAVS units, and then also attending fireman's training or fire training school and having volunteer certification. These were left out of the new updates to the fire suppression rating schedule. However, this is one thing where we went into negotiations with the Texas Department of Insurance, and we still have a Texas exception to the fire suppression rating schedule where we give credit for compressed air foam systems, we give credit for attending fire training school, and we give credit for volunteer certification. So I've asked Jesse Williams. Jesse was unable to be here with us tonight because he was under the weather. But Jesse, are we whole? And he said, yes, we are now.
Right.
And so that was the the roadblock between us adopting the grading schedule, which created the 3-year delay in the implementation of this grading schedule in Texas, like it should have been or like it was in the rest of the country. All right, then we'll talk a little bit about the water system. Now, we've made a number of improvements, enhancements to the water system. They're probably not as dramatic as they are in other areas, but we have a 1-hour residential needed fire flow. For those residential needed fire flows, we have a 1-hour duration that's necessary. Now, what that does is previously we had 2 hours, 3 hours, and 4 hours. So this has if you haven't extinguished a fire in a house, a single-family house, in an hour, it's probably a total loss anyway. So it seemed more appropriate to base that on a 1-hour duration than a 2-hour or 3-hour.
I was going to ask you what it was, but okay.
Okay, that cleared that up?
Yeah, gotcha.
As we were developing this schedule, we ran across a lot of large homes. Homes are bigger than they used to be.
That's true.
And probably in 1980, these would be just, they weren't considered. Now, previously we used rules of thumb to evaluate the homes, and it was based on the spacing between the homes. Well, we saw fires in homes that are 25,000 square feet and go, based on spacing, that's a 500 GPM needed fire flow. And that really doesn't accurately project what it would really take to extinguish a fire in those type of homes. So what we did is, for the larger homes, anything over 4,800 square feet, we're going to base the needed fire flow based on the size of the building, the construction of the building, the occupancy of the building, just like we would a commercial structure. So it's going to be a little bit more needed fire flow, but it'd be a whole lot more representative of what the need is in that department, in that area. We also have modified the distance to the fire hydrants criteria that we used. We spent a lot of time calculating, is this a hydrant, or is it from this property, is it 300 feet? Is it beyond 300 feet or 600 feet or within 600 feet of a fire hydrant, or is it beyond 600 feet and 1,000 feet of a fire hydrant? We did a lot of time and effort calculating those things, only to find out it really didn't matter, because that wasn't one of the limiting, or that may have been the limiting turned out it wasn't the limiting factor for the consideration in the grading schedule. So we determined that it probably would be better just to credit all the fire hydrants within 1,000 feet of the structure. And interestingly enough, along with AWWA, we have increased the amount of water capability out of an individual fire hydrant from 1,000 GPM to 1,500 GPM. So we've made some very nice enhancements to that. You can get you could get more water out of a fire hydrant than we were given credit for. So now we're giving credit more in line with what you're actually capable of getting the water out.
You raised the maximum.
We've raised the maximum that we can credit.
Right.
And so that's a good thing. We have internally, we've renewed our effort to gather hydrant flow testing information. And this is one of the areas we really would like to work with safety members and see if you can help us accomplish that goal. We're looking for hydrant flow test information from the community. As a matter of fact, in our grading schedule, there are points assigned for hydrant flow testing credit. And we want to see that the community gets those points, but we're also looking we need to get to more communities on a faster pace. And what we're trying to accomplish there is our customers would really like current and up-to-date information. And so going out and doing hydrant flow tests, although it was one of the fun parts of the job, it's something that took a lot of time and effort for us to do. The community really needs to know what their capabilities are anyway. And so if we can get them to do the hydrant flow testing capabilities, and then we take their records, their results, and incorporate them into our grading, we're just a whole lot faster and more efficient than that. Also, the advantage for the community there is they can do their hydrant flow testing when there's water available. In Texas, you don't want to do your hydrant flow test in the middle of July or August when water is a precious commodity. So we certainly want to support that as well.
Sure.
We've made some recent adjustments in the evaluation of tanker shuttles and suction supply points, and there's a number of other areas there, but mainly for your alternative water supplies. There have been some recent adjustments. I don't want to go into a lot of detail here because that's one of the areas that's going to take a lot of time and effort to get into it. We're limited somewhat to an hour tonight, and so we'll talk a little bit more about that, but down the road we want to, if somebody wants to have specific questions on tanker shuttles, alternative water supplies, we can certainly do that.
Sure.
Now, there were two buzzwords in the update of this grading schedule that really struck home. And ironically, well, they're predictive of loss and revenue neutral. We wanted this new grading schedule to be more predictive of loss than the old grading schedule. That being said, we also wanted it to be revenue neutral. We didn't want all of a sudden a whole bunch of communities get lower insurance premiums, and therefore the insurance companies are not collecting as much money as they should for the losses they're accounting for. And we didn't want the insurance companies making a whole lot more money because they're collecting it on higher premiums. So we wanted them, for the most part, to be within a certain threshold of, how much change actually accounted for in this grading schedule. Ironically, those two, excuse me, I just broke that. All right, ironically, those two just seem to butt heads against each other because as you make it more predictive of loss, it's probably going to be one direction or the other as far as which way it goes. Okay. Along with the updates to the fire suppression rating schedule, we had a couple procedural changes that came in as well. We looked at, I've already mentioned a little bit, we want to do things faster. As a matter of fact, we were used to have a 10-year frequency on most communities. On some communities, we extended that out to 15 years. With the adoption of this new grading schedule and the survey efficiencies built into this, we're really shooting for a 4 to 5 year turnaround on the communities. Our customers, the insurance companies, they just want to know what is the appropriate classification today, and if not today, within the last 4 or 5 years, we want to know, have you been out there and looked at it? And so this is something we really were aware of, and we wanted to make it faster, so we built in a lot of survey efficiencies. Along with that, we've changed some of the classification structures. Now, in line with that, this is just something, it's all good news, but everybody needs to understand what we're talking about. We introduced something called the Split Class X, Split Class Y, and the Water Class 10 classification approach. Now, on the Split Class X, it basically replaced the old Class 9. So if you had a 5/9, that would now become a 5/5X.
Oh.
So it's really not a big deal. What we found is if you're in a 5 community, even though you're beyond 1,000 feet of a fire hydrant, the losses were lower because you have a better fire department providing protection than if you were in just a standard Class 9 community. Same thing goes if you were in a 5/Y, because the 5/5Y, the 5Y represents an 8B. And we can talk a little bit more about the 8B, but I think most everybody understands what that is. But in those communities, if you're in a 5 community, you're probably going to have lower losses than if you were in a standalone 8B. And so this allowed us to segment the losses based on the appropriate classification, and then we can work with the multipliers down the road. We established multipliers right from the start that we're making insurance companies aware that they can use those. But we'll see. Time will tell how well adopted this is. We also have the Water Class 10 approach, and the Water Class 10, we found out that if you have water available to you, we've always had this hard line in the sand that we drew that said if you're beyond 5 road miles of a fire station, you should be a Class 10. Well, if you have fire hydrants or 8B or alternative water supply available to you, we found that the losses were lower between 5 and 7 miles from a fire station. So this isn't something that you're going to see in your classification, but it's something we're going to make insurance companies aware of outside of the classification. It's built into the rules that there are the likelihood of lower losses in those communities, and lower losses correlates into lower insurance premiums. So we're promoting that. And it's, again, time will tell how well adopted that is. Now, in addition to the split class rules, we've also had the elimination of the old 85% rule. We used to look at a community and say, as long as 85% of it is within 1,000 feet of a fire hydrant, that's good enough. We're going to make that a single classification. Well, what we ran into is we had a number of properties that burned, and the insurance companies came back to ISO and said, well, this property is beyond 5 road miles of a fire station, and this property is beyond 1,000 feet of a fire hydrant. Why did you tell us that's going to be a single classification? That's a really hard hard question to answer. Mm-hmm. So now, for you to get a single classification, you really have to have all of your properties within 1,000 feet of a fire hydrant and within 5 road miles of a fire station. If that's not the case, we're going to make it a split classification so that we're giving our customers, the insurance companies, the appropriate representation of what it is out there.
So, in other words, the insurance companies were coming back and saying, why'd you tell us this is a 5? Because, and your answer is essentially, well, 85% of this department's coverage area isn't a 5. So even though this doesn't fit the 5 road mile, 1,000 feet rules, we went ahead and counted it as a 5. And so you said, to be a little more accurate in representations to the companies, you basically made it 100%, right?
That's correct.
Okay. I understand the logic, right?
Again, along with the technology we talked about and what's changed since 1980, we didn't have the same technology capabilities in 1980 that we do today. Now this is just a simple yes or no answer that can be developed by a computer program real quickly. Are there properties beyond 1,000 feet of a fire hydrant? Are there properties beyond 5 road miles? Computer can tell us that answer in seconds versus time that would take drawing things manually to determine that.
I understand.
The big issue here is there's going to be some changes along the way, and the thing that I want the ESD members, or excuse me, safety members, to be aware of is that there are changes out there, and when they see their results come back, this will help them understand what they're all about. There's information on our website as well to help further explain this, or I'm always available by phone or by email. We have also changed the way that we classify communities. In the past, we used to look at a community and the area that it serves outside that community to determine, here's the way it is, and we would call that a city and an OPA classification. Well, we had some challenges to that, and whether or not that fairly represented the classification structure that we should, and so we have actually changed that, and we credit the FPSA and the FDA concept, or I'm sorry, FDS concept. Now the FPSA in Texas means there's probably a fire hydrant within 1,000 feet of that area of property. And the FDS is a representative of the fire department supply. The fire department supply means there's not a fire hydrant. They're bringing the water through either a long diameter hose lay, or tanker shuttle, or an 8B. And so that area, or class 9, it could be an area beyond 1,000 feet of a fire hydrant. So that area is going to be represented differently than it would be if it was in the FPSA. Ironically, about the same time that we were adopting that grading approach in Texas, we got away from it in the rest of the country, and now everything is called an FPSA in the rest of the country, and it's lost its significance. It doesn't mean that it's a hydranted area anymore. It means that's in the fire protection service area countrywide. Right. So it's a little bit of a discrepancy.
Okay.
Now the good news behind this, I want to refer people to our website, and more specifically the facts and figures section of our website. And this is where we determined the number of Class 1 communities. I had information from 2012 that indicated there were 60 Class 1 communities countrywide. And there was, in 2018, I'm looking at our list, and now there's 315 Class 1 communities countrywide. So what we have seen is the adoption of this grading schedule not necessarily made it easier, but we're getting to so many more communities that we weren't getting to in the past, that we're seeing a lot of communities come in as better classifications. And the same goes for in Texas. In 2012, we only had 13 class communities. Today, in 2018, currently our website shows there's 57 Class 1 communities in Texas. We almost have as many Class 1 communities in Texas as we did in the entire country in 2012.
Wow.
So that's a really neat feature. Now, ironically, if you look at it, even though, in 2012 we had 22% of the Class 1 communities, now we have 18% of the Class 1 communities. So
the country's kind of outpacing us now.
To some extent. And one of the difficult things that I see is the rest of the country has been working on this new grading schedule for 3 years longer than we have, and they've gotten to more communities, and we've had a 3-year delayed implementation to the grading schedule. If we had come on board, I don't know if the numbers would be dramatically different or not, but it's be kind of an interesting. It's looking back on it, is in hindsight, I wish that we'd moved forward sooner.
It's still impressive to have 57 Class 1 communities in Texas, almost, like you said, almost equaling the 60 that were nationwide in 2012. I know South Montgomery County, Montgomery County ESD 8 is a Class 1. They were the first ESD in Texas to achieve a Class 1 rating. If there are any others out there, please let us know at SafeD. I know there are at least one or two others, and it escapes me now. Big shout out to James Kelly and his crew over there at South Montgomery County, Robert Hudson, Chief, for getting theirs to Class 1. And we want to know if you achieve a lower rating, that Class 1 rating with your ESD. Please let us know. We'd like to publicize that around SafeD and in our newsletter and things like that. So please let us know.
And another thing I look at, and it's kind of interesting to me, is not only the Class 1s, but the Class 2s. We were at 19% of the Class 2 communities were in Texas, and now we're still at 19%, 6 years later. On the Class 3s, we had 9% in 2012 of the Class 3 communities countrywide, and we have 8% of the Class 3 communities countrywide. What we see as we look at the classification structure is just basically a shift to the left. The 1s, 2s, and 3s are growing faster, are growing, and the 5s, 6s, and 7s are slowly diminishing. We are seeing that people are providing better fire protection. The updates to the fire suppression rating schedule, and more specifically the updates to the frequency, has really helped us establish classifications quicker, and so this allows us to improve the classifications more reflectively.
It seems like all this hard work you guys are doing in refining the process and refining the grading schedule has gotten everyone kind of active, and now everyone's sort of pulling up a little bit, from the 5, 6, 7s even to the 1, 2s, and 3s now.
That may be. I'd like to think that the fire service is doing this entirely organically.
Well, of course, yeah, there's that too. I mean,
this is something they wanted to do.
Everyone strives for greater protection in their community.
Our role in this is just to be that independent third party that represents what level of fire protection they're actually providing.
Yeah.
So that's a good thing. Now, we started off the presentation with a statement. We also want the ESD commissioners to be able to use this information to develop their strategies to improve their fire protection in conjunction with the rating. So just a slight modification to the way it was stated before. I think that's real important. One of the things we like to do, we talked about SafeD, the annual conference. We'd love an invitation to come back and tell people more about it. We have 2 hours, 4 hours, and 8-hour presentations that we traditionally give to communities at their request, whatever they want to do. It's at no cost to the community. We'll come out and meet with them. The one thing we would like to do is we'd like to talk to a significant audience. So if they can pull together, some of their neighbors and their friends together, that's a good thing, and we certainly support that wholeheartedly.
Mm-hmm. If you're interested out there in one of these ISO presentations, we'll give you Philip's contact information a little later, and it's on the website for ISO, but also you can feel free to come to us, and Safety could try to maybe arrange something with our wider representation. We could try to get a big group together, kind of make it worthwhile for everybody to get together and have a big group.
That would be great.
Mm-hmm.
We fully support this. So
yeah, absolutely.
I think you said you might have some questions and answers.
I know we do have some questions. Let me real quickly, which camera am I coming back to? Let me go real quickly to reminding everyone how to get their questions in. Now is the time to do that. While we have still about 10 minutes or so here. You can call us at 512-251-8101. Email us at safed@texas.net. Texas is spelled out. Text me here and right in the studio, 512-567-0857. Normal text messaging rates may apply, and I cannot answer that number on live on air. I'm sorry. I wish we could patch calls through and have live people on air like a radio station, but we're not there yet. And I don't know if we'll ever will be, because I like to have control over this call screening. You can also, for a retro look, fax your questions in 512-251-8152. The fax actually doesn't go to a fax machine, I'll be honest with you. It goes to an email. It creates an email that comes to us as a PDF. Little behind the curtain there, yeah. As you said, modern technology is updating and it's not 1980 anymore, so that's how that works. Let's get to some of these questions. Okay, I want to address a question that came in from Henderson County, actually pre-filed their question. I want to be sure to respect that. One of our members in Henderson County asked, they're a smaller ESD. Can you offer anything that you've seen that smaller sort of departments have done that can make a big difference sort of in lowering their classification? Is there anything easy for sort of revenue-strapped departments that they can do that you're like, well, if you just did this, this would be so easy, doesn't cost a lot, and it can really make a difference in the grading schedule?
Absolutely. We talked a little bit already about one of the things I think is really easy points for them, and that is the deployment analysis. What we see is for those communities, specifically the smaller ones, and I'm looking at a one station town that everything is within 1.5 miles of the fire station. The deployment analysis is actually a huge benefit for a smaller community, because we look at the areas beyond 1.5 miles of an engine company and beyond 2.5 miles of a ladder company as negative features to the deployment analysis. If that community is small enough and it doesn't include doesn't have areas like that, it really helps them get a big portion of those 10-point items. So it's one of the things, looking back on it, it's really good for a very small community.
Now, you talked about your deployment analysis, and we talked a little bit about that in terms of your call detail records. You are giving response times or credit for response times in this new classification system.
We have the method of crediting both. Traditionally, we have credited based on the distance. It's 1.5 miles from an engine versus 2.5 miles from a ladder. In addition to that, we do have the deployment analysis criteria that's in 1710, but it's based on a 2-minute response, 240 seconds. So it's a 4-minute response from an engine company and a 480-second response from a ladder company. But anyway, it's based on the criteria in NFPA 1221, and it's based on the deployment of the apparatus there. So response times are considered in that, and specifically if they're working on a deployment analysis through an accreditation program. So that is taken into consideration, yes.
I was looking at another question. When you say accreditation program, what does that mean?
Are you familiar with the accreditation program? There's a company or an organization out there, CIPSE, Center for Public Safety Excellence, that they do an accreditation program based on the International Association of Fire Chiefs.
And that's who's certifying, because you talked about you need to see consistent.
Well, they're accredited.
Right, accredited.
Yeah.
I know it's important to use very, very exact words. They're accrediting.
Exactly, and I don't want to misuse the words.
Right,
either.
I understand. No, it's good
program.
to be precise.
But part of their program is developing a deployment analysis. If a community is working on that, or if they can meet that threshold that we're looking for, then we can give them credit for it.
Okay, so an accredited deployment analysis is something that you want to, that may help.
Doesn't have to be an accredited deployment analysis. If they're working on their accreditation for their fire department, the department, the community is actually accredited.
Okay.
But part of that is a deployment analysis,
Okay.
and we use that to determine whether or not that we're going to give them credit.
Got it. Okay.
If they don't have that, then we fall back on our old method of using the distances.
Distance. Okay. Yeah, because that was one of my questions, and we kind of talked about it earlier. Is how can you verify that? How do you?
Well, we've made this thing as complicated as possibly can.
No, but I mean, I think it's a good thing to give people more options. We got some questions coming in now. A Nueces County question, which is a really good question, kind of to the procedure. Talking about, he says he was told that the ISO evaluation would be coming to the community soon. This is Nueces County down in Corpus Christi area. Does the ESD get any kind of heads up when when you guys are coming out? How does that work?
Yes, we're trying to get to every community every 4 to 5 years. Mm-hmm. So we're coming much more frequently than we have in the past. Still, what we do is we will contact you in advance. We're going to send you a pre-survey package. We're going to let you take your time to complete that pre-survey package, but we're going to want to schedule a date so that we can come out and validate and verify the information we're being provided through the pre-survey package so that we can establish the classification. If you have spent the time, the worst thing to happen is for us to show there and the pre-survey package hasn't been completed, because now we're digging through file cabinets for records, and that's just not efficient use of your time or ours.
Right.
And we want communities to have the opportunity to gather that information in advance. So yes, we do send out pre-notifications to communities. I am not aware of any surprise surveys that we've ever done.
Right. So you'll send the pre-survey package, and they get back to you and say and schedule the date. I mean you work with them on working on the date.
As we're sending them the pre-survey package, we're telling them, we're 2 to 3 weeks away, maybe as much as a month or 2 months. We want to go ahead and get this information, gather it, collect it, and while it's fresh.
Okay.
Now, this isn't something that we should spend a lot of time and effort on preparing for a field survey. It's intended to be what level of fire protection are you actually providing today. And so, if we're spending a lot of time and effort, we're probably not reflecting what level is actually there.
Understandable. So in this instance, can this individual contact ISO and can they say, we're wanting you guys to come out? Will you please
Absolutely.
come out? Okay.
Actually, if we get what's called a survey request, it gets moved to the top of the stack.
Okay.
For those communities that want us to be there, we want to come out there and we want the information up to date, current, up to date. Nothing's better than a survey request as far as gathering and collecting that information.
Okay.
Cold calls are hard no matter what field you're in.
Absolutely.
So.
Absolutely. Okay, I want to ask a question going back to some of the talk about training and certification. You talked about ICS training, the NIMS training. Well, first off, let me ask kind of a general question. When you're looking at the fire department part of it in terms of training, can you get any points? Obviously, you get points based on the personnel in the department and their training level, right?
Yes.
And their certifications. What about ESD commissioners? Is there any points for that kind of thing?
This is
For their certification, their education?
This is a grading schedule for, to be used countrywide.
Right.
And when you get into very specific areas like the ESD commissioners, those would be credit points that would not be available to incorporated cities. And so we've kind of stayed away from those types of credits specifically. But if an ESD commissioner was on the fire department, I'm not sure if they're even allowed to do that. I think they may be prevented from being on an individual fire department. But if they were, they could be given credit for that.
Okay.
But for the most part, this is for the training for those that are actually engaging in fire protection.
Okay, so actual personnel.
Yes.
I do want to take this opportunity to mention that we will be having NIMS training at the conference as a pre-conference option. It's the training for elected officials or public officials, and it's required for emergency managers in the county. And we're really excited about that pre-conference training that we're going to have. So please be watching more publications about our conference for information on that. And it's a great class, and we're very excited to have it. Speaking of that class, one of the people who helped arrange that class, a question from Parker County. Please explain when an aerial apparatus might be required for ISO purposes.
Okay. Actually, an aerial apparatus, whether it's in the new schedule or old schedule, is still largely the same. There's been a few little tweaks to it, but we look on it based on the needs of the department. And it can be determined by the height of the building. So if you have a building that's either 3 stories high or taller, or it's more than 32 feet, which used to be 35 feet, so we've reduced the height of the building, it determines whether or not you need a ladder company, or if it has a large need of fire flow. Those are what I call ladder determinants. And what it takes is 5 buildings that meet either one of those criteria. Once you have 5 buildings in your community, your community really needs to have a ladder company. And then what it gets kind of more challenging is as your community grows and develops, now you have multiple fire stations. Then we look at it from the stance, within the response area of a fire station, do you need a ladder company? It's still based on the same criteria. 3-story buildings, 3,500 GPM, or greater than 3,500 GPM needed fire flows determines you need a ladder company. Once you get 5 buildings in an individual response area, then you need to have a ladder company in that response area. Now, if you don't need to have a ladder company, you automatically need to have what we call a service company. And a service company carries the same type of salvage and overhaul equipment that a ladder company does. It just doesn't have the big aerial device, whether it's an aerial stick or a platform. So, did that answer your question?
Yeah, that's very detailed, and yes, I think so. Mark will let me know if it didn't. So
sometimes I can get caught up in the technical jargon.
No, I understand. Well, he's a firefighter too, so he understands a lot of that. And yeah, it's I get the 5 building issue for the area.
The way I look at that is we're not evaluating the worst case scenario.
Okay.
Everybody talks about the worst case scenario. What we're evaluating is the 5th worst case scenario.
Okay.
So
the 5th worst case scenario. I got you.
If you got a number of buildings that you need a ladder to fight a fire in that building, we're going to say you need one.
Okay. So it's not just one. You can get away with one.
You can get away with one.
Okay. We've got some more questions here. Okay, this is kind of along the same lines with the procedural question. Is there any expense required for the district, the department, to have that ISO evaluation?
The evaluation itself? Yeah. No, sir. The insurance companies, they want this information. They provide the funding for our operations.
Okay.
So they're the ones that are paying the freight.
Excellent.
We provide this at no cost to the community, and I don't say that it's free. The reason I say that is a lot of communities will spend a lot of time and effort to prepare the documentation, to prepare the information that we're asking for. So I don't want to undersell their contribution to the process. This isn't free. It's just we don't send a bill for any of the services.
There's no expense to ISO, the organization, from them. You may incur expenses in getting ready and having to do what you need to do for your evaluation, but that's a whole different thing.
Absolutely.
Okay, let me search through a couple of these here. In terms of the certification, you mentioned volunteer certification is something that they can get credit for, and that's one of the things you preserved in the Texas exceptions, right?
That's correct. And it can be through the State Firemen's and Fire Marshals
That was my
Association
question. Okay.
or through the Texas Commission on Fire Protection, because they both have certification programs.
Right. I know I knew obviously the TCFP certification, and people are familiar with that for the full-time firefighters, professional firefighters. But I did want to mention our good friends at SFFMA and their volunteer
Absolutely.
certification that they are very proud of and do a good job. And we've actually had them present about that
very good.
at the conference. So they're a good friend to us, and we wanted to get a little plug in there for them. Okay. Let me see here. Where are we on these questions? Because this is a very detailed, interesting, nuanced.
It's kind of tough to squeeze, all of ISO into an hour-long presentation.
It is.
Normally, when we get into this, we want to tell them a lot about it. So we have the 2-hour, the 4-hour, and the 8-hour presentation. Just depends on how in depth you want to go.
Sure. Well, it could have been even longer because we, as you alluded to, Jesse Williams from the insurance department was supposed to come today. He wasn't able to make it because he's under the weather. But it leads me to a question. So Jesse's office is with the state.
That's correct.
And TDI, right? Texas Department of Insurance Fire Marshal's office.
The State Fire Marshal's office is a branch of the Texas Department of Insurance.
How do they, and we talked about this briefly ahead of time, how do they interact with ISO? What is the role? Can you just briefly talk about how ISO and the state insurance office, how that all works?
Okay, and what happened is ISO, or let's go back before that, the Texas Department of Insurance and the State Fire Marshal's office was also involved with the old key rate program that existed in Texas for a number of years prior to this. But what happened is ISO was brought into the state to perform the PPC classifications. Now the state had done some type of a classification before, and so they wanted to maintain some type of a role in the process, and they established it as a oversight regulatory arm. Okay, so what we do is we will submit our recommendations for classifications. The first step was we send them to the community. The community has 30 days to get back with us, whether they agree or disagree on their classification, before we send it on to the state. The Texas Department of Insurance has delegated that authority to the State Fire Marshal's office, and so they have 30 days to review our recommendations of any classification adjustments. And then once they give us the approval to go forward, then we will send out notifications to the insurance companies countrywide that use ISO that here are the updates that we're making, not only in Texas but countrywide, to the different classification updates. So we have basically 60 days additional in Texas working with the community and the State Fire Marshal's office, and that kind of accounts for some of the length of the publication cycle that we have here in Texas. So
it goes from you all to the community.
Yes.
It's sort of an advance notice. Here's what we think your score is. What happens if they disagree?
Well, then we get back together. It's a pretty involved process. Mm-hmm. There is the opportunity for there to be some miscommunications on what level of service you're providing. If they have an issue with the grading that we were assigned, we'll get back with them and work with them. If they can send us some documentation, maybe we can adjust that in-house beforehand. And then we also send it to the State Fire Marshal's office, and we've had some communities wait until that step in the process, and then we're basically have 3 different parties discussing what the classification should be. And so then once everybody's in agreement, okay, we think we're there, then we move it forward for publication.
Okay, so that's a very good explanation of the process there. Thank you. Talked about volunteer certification. I was going to get into some of the split class stuff, but I think you eventually answered the question.
It can be a little bit confusing.
So there is no more 5/9s, right?
The 5/9s would be now a 5/5X.
Okay. And as a practical impact, what does that? How do they rate the 5?
What we saw is on a class 1 through 5 department, and even on a class 6 through 8 department, you'll probably have lower losses in those communities, even if they're beyond 1,000 feet of a fire hydrant, than they would be if they're in a standalone class 9. And so now we've segmented it into different buckets that you can put the losses into and determine what we can refine that information from this point going forward.
Right.
But right now we've already assigned, what we think should be appropriate as far as multipliers for that improved fire protection.
So so that makes sense, because it's basically like a 5-ish kind of.
A 5-ish is a good way of looking at it.
Yeah, so it's not. I get it. I wanted to ask a question before we have to go here about the hydrant testing, because you sort of said you were looking for help on that to try to compile more records on hydrant testing. What would be beneficial on that? Because I know, so if you're trying to do a commercial building in Austin or whatever, and you can ask Austin Fire Department to do a hydrant test, and you go to their website and you pay for a couple $100 or whatever it is, and then they give you a hydrant test on one hydrant. If our ESDs out there, our safety members, have those kind of records of past tests that they've done, is that the kind of thing that you'd appreciate them sending in to y'all?
Absolutely.
Or compiling?
If you have test records that you already have in hand, we wanted to take a look at those. But in our grading schedule, in addition to that, in our grading schedule, we're looking for communities, whether it's an ESD or city or whatever political justification it is, we're looking for them to test their system on a basis of every 5 years.
Okay.
So we would really like for them to go out and test their system on a somewhat frequent basis so that they have current records. Now, we're not asking them, I want to get out ahead of this early, because we had an issue with this under hydrant inspections previously. We're not asking them to test every fire hydrant. We're not asking them to do a hydrant flow test on every fire hydrant either. We're just asking for them to test all portions of the system. The best explanation for that, best kind of clarification for that, if you get in a hydrant flow test about every 8 to 10 city blocks, you're probably doing enough fire hydrants to test the system.
Okay. So it's more of a system test,
it's not an individual hydrant test.
We want to know what that hydrant on the corner of whatever and such street.
Well, we're not asking you to test every fire hydrant in the system, which would be a big task.
I was wondering about that, so that's a good clarification. Okay, we've got a couple more that we can get to, and then we're going to have to go. I gotta give a question from El Paso if they got their question all the way here. Is there a web page the public can view where their ISO rating?
No, sir.
So it's not public or publicized.
Right.
Okay.
And the kind of the reason behind that is, keep in mind, the insurance companies are paying the freight. They're the ones. The information that we're providing to them is the classification. So we can't really make that available on a website available to the general public for free, and then go to our customers and say, well, it's out here for free, but we'd really like you to pay for it.
I understand.
So.
Okay, I think you kind of went over this when we were talking about the split classification. What are the distance measurements for a split classification from the fire station and or water supply? That's sort of the five road miles, 1,000 feet, right?
Right. Now the justification, I think, is a little bit different twist to it. I'm going to try to answer that, and I'm probably not going to do as good a job on it on the hydrant spacing as I am from the standpoint of a fire station. But due to the time distance equation, you can only travel so far before, as the fire grows and develops. We're really looking for the apparatus to be able to get there before flashover occurs. There's a finite amount of time that happens before flashover occurs in a building. once flashover occurs in a building, you're pretty much looking at a total loss. So we need them to get there prior to that time, so they can set up and start fire suppression before that happens. So from a fire standpoint, that's all based on your time distance equation. Now, from a fire hydrant standpoint, realistically, we're looking at it to be within 1,000 feet of a fire hydrant. That's because most engine companies, according to NFPA, carry about 1,000 foot of attack hose, and they carry enough, supply hose, and then they carry enough attack hose to go inside the building as well. And so you really need that fire hydrant within 1,000 feet to really perform effective firefighting, or at least from our standpoint.
Okay.
I think that's the justification.
Yeah. No, I get it.
And from time to time, I can be a little bit long-winded.
No, I appreciate all the detail. This has been great. We're going to go in just a second. If you'll give me a couple more minutes, I want to get to one more question, which is, I said I wasn't going to ask it, but, we can kind of close on it because it's such a general question. And I expected to get this question tonight. What is the best way to get a 1? Is there?
Ironically, I'll answer that question.
Okay.
And it really comes down to, this is just subjective, this is my opinion, this is not. But ironically, when you get down to a 2 and a 3, you have eaten up all the really easy points there are to get. And when you go from that, you make that step from a 2 to a 1, we're really talking about staffing and personnel.
Okay.
Is the driving factor, because you've eaten up all the easy points. You're doing all the training credits you can get. You're doing all. It's a staffing issue.
Okay.
And without a certain level of staffing, it's really hard to get to a class 1.
That's a good answer. That's a direct answer that was not evasive. It's usually staffing. That's great. Thank you so much, Phillip, for being here tonight.
Well, thank
we really
you for having
appreciate
me.
it. Thank you all for joining us tonight. I got to get you to your credit. For more information about let me ask this question really quickly. In terms of contacting you, Phillip, is your contact information, what's the best way for them to reach you if they have more questions?
Our website is www.isomitigation.com.
Okay.
That's probably the best way to get the contact information. My personal cell phone is 512-751-6850.
Okay.
So
there you go.
More than welcome to contact me. I carry it with me basically all the time.
I know a lot of these folks like to send emails more than
they made it real simple for me. It's PBradley@ISO.com.
P. Bradley at ISO.com. Perfect.
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you so much. For more information about all our future training opportunities and our registration for those, that'll be available through safed.org.